About a week or two ago, popular military content creator Habitual Line Crosser posted a question to Twitter that touches on the very latest in stealth technology. Would it be possible to design a stealth aircraft with retractable, standing vertical tails? Now, we've all seen the renders of 6th-gen fighters with no standing vertical tails, but we also know that creates big challenges in terms of flight control and advanced maneuverability. So, as he put it, why haven't we designed an aircraft with foldable tails? Like it's doing suppression of enemy air defense ops. Fold them down, stay hidden, and happy hunting. If you're in a bad situation and merge with the enemy where they're needed, pop them up and go to work. We made swept wing designs 50 years ago. I know we have the tech to do this. What am I missing? And in a lot of ways, he is absolutely right. If we could get the F-111 Aardvark into the air by 1964, the F-14 by 1970, and the B-1B by 1974, why can't we get folding tails on 6th-gen fighters in 2025? Well, the truth is, we probably could, but there are still problems that we'd need to overcome first, starting with the biggest hurdle facing any new fighter development program: balancing the immense costs of development, production, and sustainment against the improved battlefield capability a new technology like folding tails could give us. Because the truth is, it isn't physics keeping us from building folding tail fighters, it's economics. And it might just be a matter of time before that hurdle finally falls. So let's talk about folding tail fighters, why they haven't come yet, why they could come in the near future, and why their tenure in active service could still be pretty short-lived. I'm Alex Hollings, and this is Air Power. Basketball legend LeBron James just became the first NBA player in history to write an article for Chinese state media. In a piece published by China's state-owned People's Daily, James expressed his gratitude for the enthusiasm and kindness of his Chinese friends following his visits to Chengdu and Shanghai. Now, the NBA, of course, was banned in China 6 years ago after one team manager tweeted support for democracy protests in Hong Kong, but it returned 3 years ago after one ESPN report found that the 40 primary NBA team owners now have more than $10 billion worth of investments in various Chinese industries. And you guessed it, I've been staying on top of all this with Ground News. Ground News is an aggregator that collects articles published by news outlets all over the world and then sticks them all into one easy-to-read feed that helps me not just stay on top of what's going on, but also to see right through most common forms of media bias. Right here on Ground News, I can see that only 9 outlets have covered this story, including just one left-leaning outlet and 5 right-leaning ones. Now, that one left-leaning outlet framed the story as a bit of, quote, LeBron diplomacy after a years-long spat between China and the NBA, whereas right-leaning outlets were a lot more aggressive in their headlines, like this one that reads, "Our Chinese friends. LeBron James writes op-ed for CCP mouthpiece involved in propaganda campaign to deny Uyghur genocide." And Ground News also shows you vital information about each outlet along with those headlines, like their political bias, factuality rating, corporate ownership, or, especially important in these cases, government affiliations. And I love the Ground News For You tab that compiles stories that are sure to interest me because they're based on topics I've chosen to stay on top of. That's actually how I found out about this story because I haven't seen much about it in mainstream media at all just yet. Ground News is a big part of my research and my day-to-day news consumption, and it can be for you too. Just go to ground.news/sandboxx with 2 X's or, just follow that link in the description below to get 40% off the same Vantage plan that I use. Again, that's ground.news/sandboxx to get 40% off their Vantage plan that'll help you stay on top of things. Stealth can be a pretty tricky word. When people hear terms like stealth, hypersonic, and AI, they tend to think that they refer to one technology, one capability, one thing. But that's really far from the truth. Hypersonic has different definitions depending on context, whether you're talking about a classification of speed or a classification of weapons. And even within weapons classifications, a hypersonic glide vehicle and a hypersonic cruise missile are both weapons that travel and maneuver faster than Mach 5, but have practically nothing else in common beyond that, leveraging entirely different technologies, modes of travel, and forms of propulsion to function. Artificial intelligence is even more nebulous, growing over time to encompass everything from machine learning to image processing to algorithmic scheduling to large language models. Basically, if it's even remotely complicated and done by a computer, there is somebody out there marketing it as AI. And the very same can be said about stealth. As I've said on this channel lots of times in the past, stealth isn't one technology, but rather a whole collection of technologies, production methodologies, material sciences, and even tactics that all overlap with one another to make an aircraft more difficult to detect or to target. Stealth technology and what it takes to be considered a modern low observable platform has changed and adapted over the past half century to keep up with the threats that it's being used to mitigate. That is to say that the stealth technology employed in the F-117 Nighthawk, when it secretly entered service 42 years ago now, has evolved significantly since, with new materials, new design philosophies, and particularly a broader focus on electronic warfare emerging in the years since, but still functioning under that overarching umbrella term that we call stealth. And now, as a new generation of fighters makes their way toward service, it is apparent that stealth is continuing to change. And maybe the most notable change we've come to expect in the years ahead is the complete removal of vertical stabilizers, or the standing vertical tail surfaces found at the rear of a fighter. Now, standing vertical tails have been a facet of fighter design since their very inception, which I would argue came in the 1910s, with air-to-air focused platforms like Germany's Fokker-Eindecker fighters and the Brits' Vickers FB-5. And there's obviously good reason for that. The tail of the aircraft, which we often call the empennage, usually includes both horizontal and vertical stabilizers, which together are responsible for providing stability, enabling aircraft control through their moving parts, and allowing the aircraft to reach a state of equilibrium in each flight condition. In other words, those tail surfaces keep the aircraft steady and are part of a larger control system that allows pilot inputs to be transferred into aircraft motion. But those standing vertical tails can also have a negative effect on a jet's overall stealth profile. Vertical stabilizers are one of several facets of modern fighter design that serve an important purpose in terms of aerobatic performance, but come at some degree of expense in terms of low observability. At times, those standing tails, along with the fighter's large gaping jet inlets and some other design elements, can produce a detectable resonance against low-frequency early warning radar arrays, which themselves lack the fidelity needed to guide a weapon into a target, but can be used to cue higher-frequency targeting arrays, thus reducing the time required to acquire a lock once that stealth jet finally does come into effective targeting range. Likewise, those standing tails can make a stealth fighter more detectable from angles other than head-on, which tends to be the focus of a stealth fighter's design. So, by eliminating those standing vertical tails, you can vastly reduce, or at times even eliminate, those low-frequency resonances or detection and targeting from the side, for instance. So, we tend to say that removing the standard tails on a fighter can improve its all-aspect stealth, or multi-directional stealth. Now, several efforts have shown that you can compensate for the loss of vertical stabilizers with things like thrust vector control, or orienting the outflowing thrust of the engine somewhat independently of the aircraft itself. And DARPA is currently even experimenting with active flow control, which uses funneled puffs of air or even electric currents produced on the exterior of the aircraft to reorient airflow without any moving parts at all. But suffice to say, both of these efforts come with pretty significant engineering hurdles to overcome if the goal is to produce a stealth fighter with anything close to the aerobatic maneuverability found in today's top-tier jets. And that brings us all the way back around to HLC's question. Because designing a fighter aircraft that can transition from the improved all-aspect stealth of a tailless design to the improved aerobatic performance of a traditionally tailed fighter could truly offer the best of both worlds. And mechanically speaking, it's not like we haven't fielded jets that could change shape while airborne before. Of course, having done it before doesn't necessarily mean it's an entirely easy undertaking. We were, in fact, fielding aircraft with variable geometry wings decades ago, like one of my personal favorite jets, the F-14 Tomcat. But we also stopped building new swing-wing jets a long time ago, too. And that has a lot to do with advancements in aerodynamics, flight control computers, and material sciences, all allowing for wing layouts that offer good performance in both low and high-speed flight regimes. Swing-wing designs are also a lot more mechanically complex than non-moving wings, which means they cost more to design, more to build, and especially more to maintain, while also adding a fair bit of weight to the aircraft. And finally, moving surfaces need clearance, or gaps, in order to be able to move, and any gap or seam on an aircraft has the potential to compromise a modern fighter's stealth. This is a big part of the reason we saw swing-wing jets die out at around the same time stealth fighters came into vogue. The benefits of changing wing shapes just didn't outweigh the challenges in terms of cost for already very pricey stealth platforms. But would that cost-benefit analysis still hold true for folding or retractable tails? As HLC said, you could retract the tails when you need improved all-aspect stealth in high-threat environments, but then deploy the tails again when you need maneuverability more than you need to be sneaky. This isn't a crazy idea at all. In fact, it's something a lot of firms are already exploring. And maybe the best exploration of the concept that's available to us outside of a classified setting came in June of 2023, when Airbus Defence and Space published a 24-page report outlining their efforts to determine how feasible folding tails on a stealth fighter could be. And what they found was honestly pretty interesting. And true to form, the abstract of this paper, penned by Airbus engineers Dr. Felix Finger, Matthias Strack, and Julius Quitter, reads like someone fed HLC's Twitter post through a grad school language filter. I will quote it directly now. Eliminating vertical tails can be advantageous from a stealth perspective, as well as from a purely aerodynamic standpoint. However, flight dynamic considerations favor stabilizing forces. To get the best of both worlds, a folding fin solution can be used. Thereby, the aircraft gets the aerodynamic and signature benefits in certain phases of flight, while keeping the stabilizing actions in others. And to start, they highlight how the idea of folding tails isn't exactly new. All the way back in 1958, the Vought XF-8U-3 Crusader III, an experimental aircraft that competed for a production contract and lost against the F-4 Phantom, had what looked like two additional horizontal stabilizers near the tail that would actually fold down during supersonic flight to provide more high-speed directional stability. From there, they explored several conceptual designs in this report, including standing tails that folded down to become horizontal stabilizers, tails that folded down into depressions in the fuselage, and my personal favorite, tails that folded down into fuselage cutouts, effectively becoming just another part of a larger delta wing. But they did also point out that, technically speaking, eliminating or folding down your vertical stabilizers and relying on something like thrust vector control to compensate is technically a violation of U.S. military regulations, as laid out in Mil Handbook 1797, or Flying Qualities of Piloted Aircraft, which states, and I quote, The control margin requirements must be met with aerodynamic control power only, without the use of other effectors such as thrust vectoring. In effect, the idea is that current air inlet designs and high-performance turbofan engines can run into problems when flying at high angles of attack and low speeds. So if you're relying on those engines to control the aircraft in those circumstances, rather than the airflow over control surfaces, and then something goes wrong, well, you're in for a pretty bad time. I'll quote the Airbus report now. While this requirement does not preclude the application of thrust vectoring for low-speed agility and super maneuverability performance enhancements in the future, it does reinforce the position that current technology, engines, and inlets should not be relied upon as the only means to assure flight safety, prevent loss of control, or provide recovery capability anywhere in the flight envelope. But not everything about this concept is bad news. One thing that didn't even occur to me until reading this report was the way folding down those standing tails not only reduces the jet's radar return, it also significantly reduces drag. In fact, that reduction is so pronounced that Airbus's engineers believe it would more than offset the added weight of the mechanical or hydraulic hardware needed to make the folding tail function, which they estimated would be around 325 kilograms or right around 716 pounds. Using a conceptual fighter design powered by two F-119 turbofan engines, the power plant from the F-22, Airbus predicted a folding tail fighter would actually offer slightly more range, about 25 miles worth, but that's not nothing, despite the added weight. But the biggest drawback of folding tails, according to Airbus, is the added design complexity. And with that added complexity comes added opportunity for failures. As they put it, quote, "The failure cases for such a design are plentiful, and the road to certification would be anything but straightforward." And of course, some of those swing wing headaches would still be alive and well in jets with folding tails, like the increased cost and labor at the design stage, the production stage, and especially when it comes to long-term maintenance. That all equates to dollars spent, and because folding those tails flat would only come in handy against high-end adversaries in a near-peer fight, well, that means spending a lot of money over a very long time for a capability that you may only use once in a while. Or, in other words, we come right back around to the same considerations we discussed for swing-wing fighters in the stealth era, where the added capability provided by these moving parts may not necessarily justify the added cost that they bring with them. But, and there is always a but, it seems all but inevitable to me that things like folding tails will eventually come into fashion, as morphing materials allow for movement without seams or gaps, and the hardware required keeps getting smaller and lighter and cheaper. But then we may yet see advanced thrust vector control, or even active flow control systems mature to the point where they eliminate the need for those standing tails anyway, making folding tail fighters something of a fad, a lot like their swing-wing ancestors. Now, I often tell people that fighter designs are always a collection of compromises, and this topic is a perfect example of what I mean. When a company rolls new fighters off the assembly line, those aircraft, no matter how modern, are not the most technologically advanced they could conceivably be. Like when Apple produces a new iPhone. That phone isn't the latest in telecommunications technology on the planet. It's the best tech that Apple could produce in large production lots for a price that the consumer would tolerate, while offering the longevity expected of the hardware. What the phone can do is balanced against what it'll cost and how long it'll last. And fighters are exactly the same. Technology really can have a huge impact on battlefield outcomes, but to some extent, combat is almost always a numbers game. If you need 750 active fighters to carry out your plans for large-scale combat operations, well, you look at your existing fighter inventory, your sustainment and procurement budgets, and you start to make decisions about which platforms, which capabilities, and which technologies you can afford to shove into a new design and still buy enough of them to meet those capacity needs. And so far, no nation on Earth has concluded that they need the added stealth provided by folding tails more than they need to allocate that funding toward other capabilities. But who knows what tomorrow may bring? It may be folding tails, it may be no tails at all. What do you think? And with that ends yet another edition of Air Power from Sandboxx News. I'm Alex Hollings. Make sure you swing by sandboxnews.com today and every day for all the latest in news, entertainment, and now merch from all around the force. If you got anything out of today's video, please click like and subscribe down below, and I really mean that. I'm trying to hit 500,000 subscribers by the end of this month, and we are inching our way there. And of course, while you're down there, leave me a comment so I know what I should cover next, and don't forget to tap on that bell icon so you never miss a drop from Sandboxx News.